For today's tutorial, I started off with a blank Wix Editor template, and the only thing that I've added in is two CMS collections, which you can see over here. So if I go over here to CMS and then your collections, you can see I made two collections, one for actors and one for movies. If I go over here into the movies collection, you'll see that we have, some metadata about different movies, and that it's linked over here to the different actors inside of the actors collection. The final thing that you'll see here over here on the right is that I've turned this movies collection into dynamic pages. So you can see right over here, this is one of the dynamic pages for our movies collection. And what we're doing here is just displaying the different data from the movies collection. So the title of the movie, the genre, a cover photo over here, a trailer, and we've also linked to the actors by connecting this repeater to the actors dataset and filtering by the current item. So far, all pretty basic stuff in terms of setting up dynamic pages. If you lost me already, then you might want to backtrack and watch one of the tutorials about dynamic pages before moving forward. So until this point, I'm assuming that you understood everything that I said and you have a basic grasp of dynamic pages. One thing you may have noticed inside of the collection is that some of the movies were missing data. So for example, over here, now I'm in the matrix, which has all of that data. But if I go over here, for example, to Forrest Gump, then you'll notice that Forrest Gump doesn't have a cover image. And if I go over here to the trailer, we have a trailer, and the actors I don't think here is connected. We can make sure by going over here into preview, and then we can see what this would look like if we don't have any of the items. So here you could just see this like big blank space over here, and here for the actors, again, it's just kind of like an empty repeater. And you'll notice that this is the same concept for some of the others as well. So if I go here to Inception, here we do have a cover photo, but we're missing the trailer, for example. And we have actors. So the goal for today will be to dynamically collapse the elements on the page if their data is missing. So for example, over here, if we don't have a trailer, then what I'm going to want to do is to completely not show this whole entire section instead of showing kind of like an empty trailer or a blank image, etc. In order to do this, we're going to need a little bit of Velo code, but it's pretty simple, and I think that even if you have zero coding experience, you'll be able to follow along. I'll say here before we get started that everything that I'm showing you here today can also be done inside of the Wix Studio Editor, albeit the code panels and the way to turn on code mode might look slightly different, but I think that you should have a really easy time converting the knowledge here into Wix Studio. So let's go on and take our first step, which will be to turn on dev mode. Over here on the upper left, you can see it says here dev mode. If you're in Studio, that'll be kind of like squiggly brackets over here on the bottom left. And once you click on dev mode, you'll have the option to turn it on. Just go ahead and click that button. And as soon as it initiates, you'll see that you have these code panels that open up on the side and the bottom. And we're not going to be doing a full dive here into code mode, but what you need to understand here is that this is where we're going to write code that will run on this page. Now, what does our code essentially need to do? Our code needs to check and see if the dynamic item on this page has those certain data points, and if it does, to do nothing, and if it doesn't, essentially to collapse certain elements on the page. So how do we know what data is included here on the page? So that we can do through our data set. And in order to do that, we'll need to open up our kind of data set panels there on the right. You can do that by clicking kind of any of the linked elements and then clicking this kind of squiggly green line over here. That will open it up. You can also find it here through the CMS panel. Now, here we're in our movie items dataset. And if we go over here to the dataset settings, okay, that was right over here, then you can scroll down and you can see here that this dataset has an ID called dynamic dataset. Now, if you're not going to remember that by heart, you can always just go ahead and control copy that. And then we're going to open back our code panel over here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting the current item from this data set. So let me zoom in right over here. And we're going to get rid of all this gray code, which is called commented out code. It means that essentially it's just kind of like notes in the code. It's not really doing anything. And all of the code that we're going to be writing is going to be inside of this onReady function. Okay, so not over here, not over here, over here in the middle. And the first thing we're going to want to do is to make sure the data from this page has loaded. This is something special when you're using data sets in Wix. And in order to do that, we're going to do $W and select the dynamic data set, just like that. You can see there's autofill here, or you can kind of paste in what we copied from before. And then we're going to say dot, and we're going to say onReady. And we're going to open up a function like that. And I know that if you're not from a coding background, then you might not understand what every single symbol here means, but you can just kind of go ahead and follow along and copy each symbol as it goes. And all of the magic that's going to be happening now is going to be happening inside of this onReady. Okay? And once we are ready, we have the data. What we're going to do is we're going to get the data for the current item. So we can declare a new variable, const current item equals to, and then we're going to $W, and we're going to select our dynamic data set again, and we're going to say get current item, just like that. Okay, and this will return the data from the data pertaining to this specific dynamic page from the data set. And we can go ahead and see that data if we add here a console.log, and we say here current item, and then we log the current item, just like that. So let's go ahead into preview mode so that we can see what the data looks like inside of this console log that we have over here. And you can either test site, you can go over here and deploy to a test site. That kind of opens up when you turn on dev mode. If you want to use the same old preview mode, you can do it by just going over here and clicking preview. Okay, once we do that, it'll enter our standard preview mode. And on the bottom, we'll have kind of a developer console log where we can see what's going on. So we have a few errors over here. Don't pay attention to those. You didn't do anything wrong. What we're looking for over here is this current item. Okay, right over here. And you can see that this has all the data from this specific item that we're on, which is the Inception video. So you can see here that the title is Inception, the genre is science fiction, etc., etc. And the things that are missing don't really exist here. So if we go over here and see, so trailer is missing. So you'll notice here there's no trailer. Okay, and if we switch from Inception to something else, so for example, let's go back to the matrix, which we know has all of the data properties, and we open up this developer console again. So here, this now is the current item for the matrix, okay, which is also science fiction. And you'll notice here that there is a trailer URL because this one does have a trailer. So what do we need to do essentially? We want to go ahead and check and see if these properties exist. And if they exist, do nothing. If they don't exist, then we're going to collapse the elements inside of our canvas in order to accommodate the fact that they are not present. Let's start off with the image. So here I am on the Forrest Gump dynamic page, and we know that Forrest Gump doesn't have an image. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in some code here after we get our current item. And what we're going to do is we're going to check and see if there's an image property on the current item. So we're going to add an if statement over here. And we're going to say here current item dot image. And that's because that's the name of the field where the image URL is stored in the collection. If you want to double check that, you can go to the collection itself. Or you can go ahead here to databases, open up the movies database over here. And then here you can see all of the different fields. And what's in parentheses here, that is the field ID for the sake of coding. So you can see here that it's called image, and that's why here I'm using current item.image. And we're going to check to see if there's an image. But actually what we want to know is if there is not an image. So in order to negate this statement, what we're going to do is we're going to put an exclamation point right over here. That's not in JavaScript. And then what we're going to say here that if there is no current item.image, what we want to do is we want this element, this image element, to collapse. So you can see here that the ID for the image element is image. You can also find that information over here in the properties and events panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to over here select that image. And we're going to say .collapse. You also have the option, if you want, to collapse, to hide the image. Hiding will essentially leave that space open, so it won't really be different than the current experience. Collapse essentially means that all of that space will disappear. So let's see what this looks like now on preview mode. So I'm going to open this up and go here to preview. And what we expect to see here is that instead of just seeing a large blank white area here, what we should see here is that the trailer kind of moved up towards the first section. There's still a little space here because that's the spacing that existed around the image. But you can see here that it's a much cleaner look, and we don't have this huge empty space where the image used to be. Now, we don't only have to collapse, or we don't only have the option of collapsing the specific element which was supposed to display our image or our text. We also can collapse another element that's related. So for example here, what we're going to do is for our trailer, instead of just collapsing this specific video player when there's no trailer, we're actually going to collapse this entire section because we also have this title here which says trailer, and it would be awkward if it said just trailer and there was no trailer underneath. And it's easier for us to collapse the entire section than to collapse two elements. Alternatively, you can also, for example, group these together and then collapse the group. It's really up to you. It's all same. So let's go ahead and collapse this section if there's no trailer. How are we going to do that? Let's open up our code panel here. And you can see here that this is called section 2. Unlike image, that's not really a very friendly name for us to use in our code. So instead of section 2, I'm going to call this trailer section. That way I really know what this is inside of my editor. And now that we've done that, we can go back over here into the code. And we're just going to add one more if statement over here. And we're going to say if no current item dot trailer URL. Again, we can just double check that this is the correct one by going over here, movies, trailer URL. You can even go ahead and copy the field ID if you want. And if there's no trailer URL, then what we're going to do is we're going to select that section, so trailer section, and we're going to say .collapse. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what this looks like for one of our movies that does not have a trailer. So let's go ahead over here into preview mode, and I need to recall which movie it was that didn't have a trailer. So Forrest Gump didn't have an image. Let me check over here. Inception. Right, so Inception, you can see here, Inception didn't have a trailer, and you can see that this trailer section is completely disappeared. And you can do this for pretty much any type of field. You could do it also for text fields, image fields, video fields, any field that might be empty. Sometimes if you want to have a little more control, what you can do is you can set a Boolean field. So if we go over here back to the editor, and let's say you really want to have control over a certain section and if it's collapsed or not collapsed based on a certain setting that you'll set inside of your collection. So you can go over here to CMS, open up your movies collection, and you can add a field that's called a Boolean field. So right over here, yes or no, it's like essentially a check mark box. And once you add that in, this one right over here, you can check it or not check it depending on if you want that dynamic page to show specific elements, and then apply the same logic that we just built for images and video URL, etc., to the Boolean field. The final thing that I'm going to show you is the most complex part of this demo, and that is how to handle, for example, if there are no actors. Now, the reason that this is more complicated is because the actors live in a separate collection, and they are only referenced from the movies collection. So if we just do a little refresher, I'm going to open up the movies collection over here. And you'll notice here that inside of our actors section over here, then some of our movies here don't have any actors. And these actors are essentially references to these items which live inside of that other actors collection. And what we want to do is we want to collapse the entire actor section if there are no actors that are attached to that movie. I know this is not really a very realistic scenario, but let's say you have a reference that doesn't have any referenced items for that specific item. How do we handle that? The challenge here comes in because you may have noticed before that the referenced items don't appear as the part of the properties inside of the current item. So if we just go back here to the code to refresh our memory, so inside of this current item here, we will never get back that list of referenced items. Even if there are actors or if there aren't actors, we'll never get that inside of this information that comes from this current item because that data is not actually in the collection that this data set is connected to. So what are our options here? So one option would be to go level up our coding skills, and instead of getting the information from a data set, to get it using Wix data query, and then we can use a property called include, which will include referenced items as well. And you might have even lost me already if this sounded too complicated. So that's not the option we're going to go for. Instead, what we're going to do is we are going to check if the data set that is actually connected to the actors collection has any items in it. So if I go over here to our actors repeater and I open up the data set that it's connected to, so you'll see that this is connected to the actors data set. So not the movies item data set, but the actors data set. And it's being filtered. And essentially what we can do is we can check if this specific data set has any items in it. Okay, if the data set doesn't have any items, then that means that there are no actors related to that movie because they're being filtered out, and we can essentially collapse our entire section. So in order to get the ID of this data set, we can go over here to the data set settings. And here we can see that this one's called dataset 1. This isn't a super friendly name, so what I'm going to change this to be actors dataset. Okay, just like that. And now we can reference that in our code. So if I open up the code panel over here, what we're going to do is we're going to open up a new onReady for our different data set. Okay, so here we have onReady for our dynamic data set, but since this is a separate data set, it needs its own onReady. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select the actors data set, and we're going to say here onReady, same as we did before. And now we're going to build some logic here into this onReady. And what we're going to do over here, this, by the way, does not have to be inside of the onReady for the dynamic data set. This could be on the outside. It could be on the inside. It doesn't really make a huge difference. So here, for the actors data set, what we're going to do is instead of getting the current item, because this one has multiple items because it's being referenced by a repeat, because it's being attached to a repeater, what we're going to do is we're going to get the total count of items. So what we can do here is declare a new variable and say total count equals 2. And here we're going to select our actors data set. And we're going to say dot get total count. Just like that. And this should be a number of how many items fit the current filters on the data set. So if it's 0, then essentially what we want to do is not to show our section where the actors live. So I'll add here a console log just so we can see what the total count looks like here. Total count. And here we'll have total count. And then under here, we'll add the if statement. So before we do that, let's just go ahead and make sure that our actors section has a friendly name. So we're going to use the same kind of principle that we used in terms of the section for the trailer. So I'm going to open this up over here. And instead of having this called section 3, we'll call this actors section, just like that. And then right over here, what we're going to do is I'm going to say if total count is, we could do a few things here. We can say if it's equal to 0. We can say here if it's smaller than 1. We can even be super, super fancy and just add an exclamation point before it, because 0 is essentially the same thing as non-existent in JavaScript. So this should also be false. Okay, or this should also be true if it's 0. I hope that didn't fly right over your head. But either way, here inside, what we're going to do is we're going to select the actors section, and we're going to collapse it, just like that. So now, if there are no actors, we should essentially not see the actors section. Let's go into preview mode and see if we were successful. So I'm going to go over here into preview mode. And let's see what we have over here. So Inception, we have 2 actors. So if I open up the developer console here, you can see here that total count says 2. Okay, so that seems to be a correct relationship that we've established. And let's go to a different one. So let's go to the Dark Knight. I'm trying to recall which one doesn't have any actors. Okay, so this one has 1 actor. And we can see here total count is 1. Let me try here. Let's try The Godfather. There we go. Okay, so The Godfather doesn't seem to have any actors. We can confirm that by opening that up here, and we can see total count 0. And we can see that the entire section for actors has collapsed because we also don't see that title actors. So not only is the repeater empty, but also that whole section is completely collapsed. And with that, we're going to wrap up. I hope you found this video informative. Please let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos in the comments below. If you liked the video, you found it helpful, giving it a thumbs up helps me right back, and also gives me kind of an indicator as to what people like so I can make more content that is a good fit for you. If you don't want to miss out on future videos, who knows, that next video might be the video that just transforms your entire Wix website and helps your business. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.